Before we read our passage together today, I want to make a comment about the designations for God that we will encounter. In most English translations of the First or the Old Testament, the original Hebrew designations for God have actually been made quite transparent. In the New Revised Standard Version, for instance, which is the translation that we're using for this series through Deuteronomy, the following is always the case in the First or the Old Testament. It doesn't apply to the New Testament because that was preserved for us in Greek and not in Hebrew. But in the First or Old Testament, the following is almost always true, and certainly is always true in the New Revised Standard Version. When the name Lord occurs with a capital L and the O-R-D in lowercase letters, that is the Hebrew title Adonai, which means Lord in the sense of ruler or leader. When the name Lord occurs with a capital L and the O-R-D in small capital letters, that is God's name, represented traditionally by the Hebrew consonants YHWH, and most likely pronounced Yahweh. When the title God appears with a capital G, one of two versions of a Hebrew word may be in view. Most of the time, the plural form Elohim is associated with the one true God of Israel. This is most likely an abbreviated or apocopated form of the longer phrase El Elohim, or God of Gods. However, on some occasions, the singular form El is used of the one true God. In either case, English translations translate both the plural form and the singular form as the singular God with a capital G and the OD in lowercase letters, if the reference is to the one true God. With that said, if the plural form Elohim is used in reference to the gods of other nations, or to spiritual beings in general, English translations will translate Elohim as the plural gods with all lowercase letters. There are occasions in English translations in which we see God written with a capital G and the OD written in small capital letters. This occurs only when the Hebrew name Yahweh occurs with the title Adonai, Lord. In that case, Adonai is written as Lord with a capital L and the O-R-D in lowercase letters, and Yahweh is represented by the translation God with the capital G and the O-D in small capital letters. Now that form does not occur in our reading today, but for those who might be curious, I wanted to be comprehensive. Now I mention this today because you'll notice in our reading that both the plural form of God, that is Elohim, and the singular form of God, that is El, are used in this passage with reference to the one true God of Israel. Also, the Hebrew words for God, that is Elohim and El, are important in any discussion of what it means to make an idol, which is the heart of our reading today. With that said, our reading today is found in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 9 through 31. This is the word of Yahweh. But take care and watch yourselves closely, so as neither to forget the things that your eyes have seen, nor to let them slip from your mind all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how you once stood before me, Yahweh your Elohim, at Horeb. When Yahweh said to me, assemble the people for me, and I will let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me as long as they live on the earth, and may teach their children so. You approached and stood at the foot of the mountain, while the mountain was blazing up to the very heavens, shrouded in dark clouds. Then Yahweh spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. He declared to you his covenant, which he charged you to observe, that is, the 10 Commandments, or more literally, the 10 words. And he wrote them on 2 stone tablets. And Yahweh charged me at that time to teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy. Since you saw no form, when Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, take care and watch yourselves closely, so that you do not act corruptly by making an idol for yourselves, in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And when you look up to the heavens and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven, do not be led astray and bow down to them and serve them, things that Yahweh your Elohim has allotted to all the peoples everywhere under heaven. But Yahweh has taken you and brought you out of the iron smelter, out of Egypt, to become a people of his very own possession, as you are now. Yahweh was angry with me because of you, and he vowed that I should not cross the Jordan, and that I should not enter the good land that Yahweh your Elohim is giving for your possession. For I am going to die in this land without crossing over the Jordan, but you are going to cross over to take possession of that good land. So be careful not to forget the covenant that Yahweh your Elohim made with you, and not to make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything that Yahweh your Elohim has forbidden you. For Yahweh your Elohim is a devouring fire, a jealous ale. When you have had children and children's children and become complacent in the land, if you act corruptly by making an idol in the form of anything, thus doing what is evil in the sight of Yahweh your Elohim and provoking him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. You will not live long on it, but will be utterly destroyed. Yahweh will scatter you among the peoples. Only a few of you will be left among the nations where Yahweh will lead you. There you will serve other Elohim, made by human hands, objects of wood and stone that neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. From there you will seek Yahweh your Elohim, and you will find him if you search after him with all your heart and soul. In your distress, when all these things have happened to you in the time to come, you will return to Yahweh your Elohim and heed him. Because Yahweh your Elohim is a merciful ale, he will neither abandon you nor destroy you. He will not forget the covenant with your ancestors that he swore to them. Why didn't the Israelites see the form of God when they encountered him at Mount Sinai? Moses has insisted that on that occasion they saw no form. And this is interesting, since we find the following recollection in Exodus chapter 24, verses 9 through 11. It says, Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the Elohim of Israel. Under his feet there was something like a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. He did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. Also they beheld Elohim, and they ate and drank. Personally, I've often wondered what Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel saw and ate on that occasion. Exodus doesn't tell us much about either their experience of seeing or tasting. However, Moses has insisted in Deuteronomy that however they perceived God, they did not see a form. In Moses' words in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 12, Then Yahweh spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. Now Moses could, of course, have been speaking there only about the Israelite experience in general, and not about the unique experience of himself, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders. But I don't think that was the case, since Moses continued by saying the following in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 15 to 16. Since you saw no form when Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, take care and watch yourselves closely, so that you do not act corruptly by making an idol for yourselves in the form of any figure. As the later incident, which we explored in our last discussion, in which Aaron made a golden calf, reveals, this command was made not only to the Israelites generally, but also to Aaron. And this leads me to presume that even those who ascended the mountain, including Moses himself, never saw the form of God. In the experience of the Israelites, God was not a shape, a form, or an apparition. God was most clearly a voice. The fire and the smoke, then, were not to be associated with God directly. Though they did indicate God's presence, they themselves were not embodiments of God. God revealed himself to Moses and the Israelites as a voice. The Hebrew word translated voice in English is the word kol. And kol does not refer only to the spoken word. Kol can, and often does, mean simply sound. In fact, this is the Hebrew word used to describe God's presence in the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8, which reads as follows: They, Adam and Eve, heard the sound of Yahweh Elohim, walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh Elohim among the trees of the garden. They heard the sound of Yahweh Elohim. The Hebrew word translated sound in Genesis 3:8 is the same as that translated voice in Exodus chapter 4 verse 12. Even to Adam and Eve, God revealed himself to them as a sound, as a voice. Adam, Eve, Moses, and the Israelites were all blessed to have been in the presence of God, and they all heard the sound of God, but none of them saw the form of God. Even more, when Moses asked to see the glory of God, that is, to perceive God's true form, God responded to Moses as follows in Exodus chapter 33 verses 17 to 20. Yahweh said to Moses, I will do the very thing that you have asked, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. Moses said, Show me your glory, I pray. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you the name Yahweh. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one shall see me and live. It is out of this truth that St. John the Apostle would later tell us that it was the sound, or the voice of God, who became flesh in the person of Jesus. Now, of course, St. John did not use the word sound. Instead, he referenced the fullness of what God has said, the Word. This is how St. John put it in the Gospel according to St. John chapter 1 verses 1 through 5 and verse 14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being, in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Now verse 14. And the Word became flesh, and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. It is, of course, not surprising that the Israelites did not see the form of God when he encountered them at Sinai. After all, God is El Elohim, that is, the God of gods, and the Hebrew words El and Elohim refer to spiritual beings. Jesus tried to explain this reality to a woman from Samaria whom he met at a well near her home. The exchange has been preserved in the Gospel according to St. John chapter 4 verses 1 through 30. Jesus said the following to her in John chapter 4 verses 23 through 24. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. God is not a physical being, nor is God a part of the material universe in which we live and move, and which God created. Not only is God the creator of the heavens and the earth, that is, of all things spiritual and physical, but God is also El Elohim, the God of gods. To say it another way, God is the supreme, the highest, the greatest of all spiritual beings. And this is precisely what Moses was trying to explain to the Israelites when he said the following in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verses 16 to 19. So that you do not act corruptly by making an idol for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And when you look up to the heavens and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, do not be led astray and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God, that Yahweh your Elohim, has allotted to all the peoples everywhere under heaven. The reason God prohibited the Israelites from making physical representations of God is because nothing physical can represent God. God is not representable by physical means. And perhaps more importantly, God is not accessible through the physical universe, nor can he be controlled by physical means. Religious cultures of the ancient Near East that made physical representations of their gods and goddesses did not believe that the idols they made were their gods or goddesses. For these religious cultures, the idols they made were meant either to attract the attention of their gods, perhaps inviting the god to come and dwell in the idol, or as means by which to manipulate or influence their gods or goddesses. The idols were symbols, albeit powerful symbols, by which the gods could be lured, or through which the gods could be accessed. What Moses was telling the Israelites was that the one true God could not be lured into an idol, could not be channeled through an idol, and could not be manipulated by a physical representation of him or by a physical representation of an aspect of creation with which they associated him. Moses told the Israelites in no uncertain terms that this would never work. Nothing made by the hands of a human being could be used to influence, to cajole, or to manipulate God. The one true God of Israel could not be accessed by material means. God showed them no form by which they might summon him in the future. God only spoke to the Israelites, and if they wished to be in relationship with him, it would be on his terms only. And God requires those who wish to walk with him to attend to his sound, his voice, to the words he has spoken. The glory of God are the words God has spoken. And when God put on human flesh in the person of Jesus, it was the glory, the Word of God, who tabernacled among us. Even God's later promise to make himself manifest to the Israelites in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle preserved this separation of God from the material universe. God's presence in the Holy of Holies was to be associated with the Ark of the Covenant, but God did not promise to dwell in the Ark of the Covenant. God's Word, that is, the stone tablets on which the Ten Commandments had been carved by Moses, were to be placed inside the Ark of the Covenant. But that's not where God would be. God explained the Ark of the Covenant to the Israelites as follows in Exodus chapter 25, verses 10 through 22. They shall make an ark of acacia wood. It shall be 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. You shall overlay it with pure gold. Inside and outside you shall overlay it. And you shall make a molding of gold upon it all around. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them on its 4 feet, 2 rings on the one side of it, and 2 rings on the other side. You shall make poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold. And you shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark, by which to carry the ark. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it. You shall put into the ark the covenant that I shall give you. Then you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. You shall make 2 cherubim of gold. You shall make them of hammered work, at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at the one end, and 1 cherub at the other. Of one piece with the mercy seat, you shall make the cherubim at its 2 ends. The cherubim shall spread out their wings above, overshadowing the mercy seat with their wings. They shall face one to another. The faces of the cherubim shall be turned toward the mercy seat. You shall put the mercy seat on the top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the covenant that I shall give you. There I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the ark of the covenant, I will deliver to you all my commands for the Israelites. Notice in this passage where God was to be located. God promised not to dwell in the Ark of the Covenant, but rather to meet with them from above the mercy seat between the 2 cherubim. Even in the architecture of the tabernacle and in the design of the Ark of the Covenant, God was not to be seen as contained within these things. God simply agreed to meet with the people in these locations, above the forms, but not as part of them. This is why the Israelites were never to incorporate carvings or sculptures in their worship of the one true God. Moses' specific instructions were these, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 16. So that you do not act corruptly by making an idol for yourselves in the form of any figure. The Hebrew word translated into English as idol in this verse is the Hebrew word pesel. Pesel comes from the Hebrew verb pasal, which means to hew into shape. So the noun form, a pesel, is something carved or sculpted. This is why the Old King James Version translated the noun as graven image. The word was not always used in a religious context. Any carved or sculpted image was a pesel, whether it was intended to be used in a religious context or not. Technically, the two cherubim on the top of the Ark of the Covenant were pesel. Due to this, the translation idol could be misleading. When a pesel was intended for religious purposes, it would then become an elil in Hebrew. You might notice the sound relationship between El, God, and Elil, idol. El means God, as I've said, or spiritual being in Hebrew, and Elil means idol, or more literally, small god. The assumption was that the Elohim, that is, gods or spiritual beings, could be accessed through Elil, that is, idols. Interestingly, Moses did not warn the people not to make Elil in Deuteronomy. That warning had been given in Leviticus. Moses, on the other hand, said that God prohibited the making of pesel, that is, carved or sculpted images. This has led to some confusion among the Abrahamic religions, that is, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as to whether God allows the carving or sculpting of any artwork at all. However, the distinction between Elil and pesel in the context of Deuteronomy 4 is really a distinction without a difference. The prohibition God gave about carved or sculpted images was with reference to Israel's interactions with him, and in that context, the terms Elil and pesel seem to have been interchangeable. What God did prohibit in the Ten Commandments is the attempted use of any physical item crafted by humans to access, to influence, or to manipulate God or God's response to us. Why did God prohibit this? Because it does not work, because God is not accessible, not able to be influenced, and not able to be manipulated through physical forms. Why not? Because God is spirit, and his true worshippers must worship him in spirit and in truth. To say the same thing more simply, God is not a thing to be venerated. God is a word to be obeyed, a voice to be heeded, a sound to which we must attend. If we wish to worship God, we must heed what he has said and obey. There is no other way to be in relationship with God according to Moses. When the worshippers of other gods make talismans or figurines or other works of art to facilitate their worship, they are demonstrating that they know nothing of the true nature of the one true God. They are assuming that God attends to the physical creations of humans, or that God can be accessed or controlled by means of human initiative and human artistic expression. According to Moses, any such worship is always the worship of a false god, no matter what name is invoked. Anyone who knows the one true God knows that God is spirit, knows that the Israelites saw no physical form when God appeared to them on Mount Sinai, knows that the Israelites heard the sound and voice of God, and knows that God has asked those who wish to follow him not to honor human artistic creations in his name, but rather to heed what he has said and to do as he has spoken. According to Moses, the making of physical objects as means through which a person might commune with God is always a rejection of the God who revealed himself to Israel at Mount Sinai, and therefore is always the worship of a false god, whatever the worshipper might believe or pretend that God's name to be. Consequently, even the spiritual beings who have allowed themselves to be worshipped as false gods by the nations of the earth cannot truly be accessed by these means either. They only pretend such things work in order to deceive those who worship them. But the one true God would never deceive his people in this way. Our God does not pretend to be in our control, that we might find the worship of him more palatable to our egos and our desire to be in control, as the false gods do. Our God has always been honest with us, and therefore God has prohibited any who would worship him from using things human hands have created as means through which their access to God might be improved. This is always a lie and a deception, and our God will have no part of it. May those who have ears to hear Listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Amen.